Good morning. Welcome to StartupHakk. This morning we're going to talk about 5 tips for improving your MVP. Now, an MVP is a minimum viable product, and it's a new concept it's been around for a little while, so it's not that new of a concept, but it's kind of grown into what I think it wasn't originally intended for. So let's go ahead and dig in today and talk a little bit about MVPs and 5 tips that you can do for improving your MVP. So let's get started.
Welcome to StartupHakk. My name is Spencer Thomason. I am the CEO and co-founder of CleanRouter, as well as many other products. Here are some lessons that I've learned building a successful business while challenging startup norms. My challenge is to push you to rethink startup success. Welcome to StartupHakk.
Okay, so now these 5 tips for improving your MVP. So an MVP is a minimum viable product. Now this idea and this concept first came from PayPal. PayPal had built a very large business, but its website was slow. The developers hated working on the code. They had a huge code base and a ton of money at this point, at the point that they approached this, but they wanted to actually shift to Node using Node.js, which was a new technology with lightning fast response times. So they wanted to switch, but they didn't know how to move this whole huge monolith that was PayPal over to this. So they came up with this concept of minimal viable product. And they said, what if we took one team, 5 developers and a product owner, and we took this and we gave them 1 week. I can't remember whether it was a week or 10 days, but it was some very fixed amount of time. And they said, we want to see if they can solve one screen, one specific need in that 7 or 10 days in that fixed time. And we just want to solve this one thing and use Node.js for it. And let's come up with a minimum viable product. So this is the first that I know of, at least documented, that ran with this approach. And I'm sure it's been around under Agile for some time, but this was the first one we really documented it. And it was documented with huge success, by the way. So this is now grown, but I think sometimes this term is kind of abused for maybe what we might call a pre-release or a beta version or even a version 1. And so I'm going to dig into a little bit about what it means to do an MVP and 5 tips that will help you to keep it as an MVP. So the very first thing is start with a very initial proof of concept. Now, in PayPal's case, they would have had to at least initially say, hey, look, we got to at least know that Node.js can serve up a couple of web pages first. And so, there's some POCs that you might want to work out before this so that you can start with a couple of assumptions. If you're haggling in a 7 or 10 day time frame on what technology stack you're going to use and some of these other parts of pieces of it, the MVP needs to really be just a couple of Lego blocks that you're putting together, not trying to figure out what colors and what the plan is. And so you definitely want to make sure that an MVP has a little working proof of concept at first, or else at least using a very proven pattern of some kind. So that's the first one. So the second one is know your market and clearly defined business goals. So the thing that I would say to this is I would say know specifically what you're solving. If I remember correctly, I think the page that PayPal wanted to use this for was the ability to create a link so that I could send you a link and say, hey, here's my PayPal link. And it was a single page, single thing that you'd go into your account and say, hey, I want to create me a PayPal me link. And you'd click this button and it would produce that link on a page. And so it was literally truly one page, one feature. And so this is a good example of how you need to make sure that you scope down and know what your clearly defined business goal and your market is. And so in this case, they obviously weren't going for massive businesses. They were going for small entrepreneurs who wanted just to be able to have a PayPal link to be able to send to people. And that kind of leads into number 3. You need to make sure you really flesh out the features. And it's interesting because the article that I'm linking from it says to flesh out your features. Well, I'll actually argue that that's actually not MVP. If you're going into multiple features, it's probably not an MVP. You're probably looking at a beta version or a version 1 or an early version or a preview version. I would argue that if you're really truly going for MVP, you're going for a single version, or a single feature. And so this is one of those things that I would really kind of even argue a little bit with the author that you really don't want to get into multiple features. Now, if there's minimum things on it, maybe, but in PayPal's example, they wanted a page that would provide you a link. That's it, one feature. And so I would tell you that for successive MVP, that's probably really the safest way to do it. The fourth one is to have a plan and indicators for success, right? So you need to know what you're hitting. And in this case, PayPal said, we need a page that will produce a link. That was their success criteria. And so you need to make sure you can very clearly articulate what success of this MVP is. Because if you can't, then you're going to get really bogged down into number 5. But this is critically important for an MVP because the whole point of MVP is to prove a specific business goal. And so if you want to prove that specific business goal, then you need to make sure that you have good indicators that are well reachable and can tell you exactly when you've hit that. Then number 5, I kind of changed a bit. The author has something totally different, well, a little different. I called it, don't get sucked into a rabbit hole. So features frequently get in and you're like, well, but it'd be really nice if we could change the color of the link. And I'm being stupid here, but you know what I mean. The point is that we get into the feature and we're like, well, it can do all these things. You have to really allow yourself to put those boundaries on it, to set your limits so that you stay within that defined business goal and not go down the rabbit hole too far. Because it can be really easy when you're starting to work on this to see all the potential. And that's the principle of Agile, is that, look, you can iterate on this the next 7 or 10 days or whatever your time frame is that you've given. And so the tip to a successful MVP is not to get sucked down the rabbit hole, because otherwise you've blown out all of the other things if you allow yourself to get sucked down into the rabbit hole. And honestly, if you've defined the business goals well and you've done all these other things, then that shouldn't be that hard to not get sucked down the rabbit hole. So again, the 5 that we have here is proof of concept with a working proof of concept is number 1. Number 2, know your market and clearly define business goals. Number 3, flesh out your feature or features if you can keep them small. Number 4, have a success plan and indicators. And number 5, don't get sucked into a rabbit hole. Make sure you get your kids protected with CleanRouter. CleanPhone is awesome. We're making some added improvements to the UI this week, and those are going out. So we're continuing to improve the product. We're following our own advice here on this, and we're staying agile and have the phone in customers' hands, getting feedback, improving the UI, and finding places we can continually to make improvement. So make sure you get your kids protected with CleanPhone and your home protected with the CleanRouter. And thanks, and we will talk to you next time.